There comes a moment in every inner journey when silence replaces explanation. You stop arguing, stop proving, stop chasing permission to become who you are meant to be. From the outside, it looks like distance. From the inside, it is alignment. Most people misunderstand this moment because they mistake your withdrawal for weakness, when in truth it is the first visible sign of self-authority. When you begin to leave, not always physically, but psychologically, something shifts in the field around you. The roles you once played for others begin to dissolve. You no longer feed expectations with your energy. You no longer volunteer your spirit to every demand. And this is when reactions begin. Not because you harmed anyone, but because you stopped abandoning yourself. Some will try to pull you back with concern, others with guilt, others with sudden praise. It will feel strange. The same people who ignored your voice may now amplify it. The same people who overlooked your presence may suddenly fear your absence. This is not hypocrisy alone. It is also human nature. People often value what is stable only when it starts to move. Do not mistake their surprise for understanding. Often they are not reacting to your growth, but to the loss of your compliance. You were predictable before. Predictability is comfortable to those who benefit from your self-doubt. Transformation removes that comfort. And when comfort disappears, truth is forced into the open. Expect resistance disguised as affection. Expect persuasion disguised as loyalty. Expect questions that sound supportive, but are designed to restore the old version of you. This is not evil. It is unconsciousness defending its familiar structure. Every system resists change, even a personal one. But there will also be a quieter reaction, one you must learn to recognize. Respect. It rarely shouts. It does not beg you to return. It steps aside and allows your becoming. Not everyone will panic when you leave. A few will understand that departure is sometimes a sacred act. Leaving is not always an exit. Sometimes it is an arrival into integrity, into responsibility, into your unborrowed life. If you turn back too soon, you will trade truth for approval again. If you continue forward, you will discover that the reactions of others are not signals to stop. They are confirmations that you have finally started. Stand steady. Let the surprise belong to them. Let the becoming belong to you. Real change begins at the precise moment you no longer wait for approval to become who you already sense you are. For a long time, most people live by invisible contracts, silent agreements to stay acceptable, predictable, and non-threatening to the expectations around them. Permission becomes a psychological habit. You ask before you act. You hesitate before you speak. You dilute your instincts before you trust them. This habit feels like safety, but it slowly separates you from your inner authority. The turning point arrives quietly. It is not loud rebellion or dramatic announcement. It is an internal shift where your compass stops pointing toward applause and starts pointing toward truth. When you stop seeking permission, you begin to notice how often fear was disguised as politeness. You realize how frequently you edited your thoughts to avoid discomfort in others. You see how much energy was spent managing perception instead of building substance. This awareness can feel unsettling because it removes familiar supports. External validation once functioned like a railing. Now you are walking without it. Yet this is exactly where alignment begins. Alignment is not a mood. It is a decision to let your values outrank your anxieties. It is choosing coherence between what you know internally and how you act externally. At first, the mind resists. It produces arguments for delay. Wait until you are more qualified, more supported, more certain, more welcomed. But certainty rarely comes before movement. It is built through movement. The self you are becoming cannot be approved in advance by people who only understand the self you have been. This is why waiting for universal permission guarantees stagnation. Growth requires self-authorization. As alignment strengthens, your choices become cleaner. Not easier, cleaner. You say no without elaborate justification. You say yes without hidden resentment. Your words begin to match your perception. Your schedule begins to reflect your priorities. Small decisions start to carry integrity. Integrity is not moral performance. It is structural consistency between inner and outer life. When this consistency grows, your energy changes. You are less divided internally, and that unity produces a quiet strength others can feel even if they cannot explain it. You also discover that authenticity is not impulsiveness. Acting from your true self does not mean expressing every emotion without restraint. It means responding from your considered center instead of your adaptive mask. The difference is profound. Reaction seeks relief, alignment seeks truth. One is driven by pressure, the other by direction. There's also a form of loneliness in this phase. When you no longer negotiate your identity for acceptance, some relationships lose their previous rhythm. Conversations shift. Dynamics reorganize. This is not failure, it is recalibration. You are no longer participating in exchanges that require self-betrayal as currency. What remains begins to feel more real, even if smaller in number. Gradually, you trust your perception faster. You recover decision speed. Doubt still appears, but it no longer governs. You consult yourself as a primary source instead of a last resort. And in that reversal, personal evolution stops being theoretical and becomes operational, lived, embodied, and irreversible. People react strongly when you withdraw old patterns of compliance and predictability because human relationships often organize themselves around expected roles rather than conscious agreements. Over time, others build an internal model of who you are, how you respond, how much you tolerate, and how easily you can be persuaded. This model becomes their psychological shortcut. It reduces uncertainty. When you consistently say yes, stay quiet, smooth conflicts, or accept imbalance, others unconsciously code you as stable territory. The moment you change that pattern, you introduce uncertainty into their mental map, and uncertainty activates emotion faster than logic. Predictability gives people a sense of control, even when they are not aware they are seeking it. Your compliance may have functioned as a stabilizer in their emotional environment. When you begin to question, decline, delay, or disagree, it is not just your behavior that changes. Their sense of orientation is disturbed. They must now reassess how to interact with you, and reassessment requires effort. Many people experience this effort as irritation, disappointment, or alarm rather than adaptation. Some reactions will appear exaggerated compared to the size of your change. A small boundary can produce a large response because it challenges a long-standing dynamic. The surface issue is rarely the real issue. You are not just refusing a request, you are refusing a role. You are not just changing a habit, you are altering a relational contract that was never openly negotiated but silently relied upon. When silent contracts break, emotional invoices are suddenly presented. There's also a psychological mirror effect. Your shift exposes the flexibility others have avoided developing in themselves. When you demonstrate that change is possible, it quietly confronts those who have postponed their own adjustments. Instead of feeling inspired, many feel threatened. Your non-compliance becomes a reminder of their compromise. Rather than face that discomfort internally, they may try to push you back into your former shape externally. Another layer is emotional economy. People invest in the version of you that made their lives easier. When that version retires, they feel a loss of convenience, support, or validation. Even if the arrangement was unfair to you, it was beneficial to them. Humans often defend benefit before they examine fairness. This defense can show up as persuasion, guilt framing, selective memory, or sudden criticism of your new attitude. These responses are attempts to restore equilibrium as they knew it. Not all strong reactions are hostile. Some are anxious. Some are confused. Some are grieving the familiarity of your old presence. Predictability creates emotional rhythm, and rhythm feels like security. When your rhythm changes, others must find a new tempo. Those with psychological flexibility will adjust. Those without it will protest. You may also notice that people who respected you quietly before become more openly supportive when you stop over-accommodating. Reduced compliance clarifies your edges, and clear edges are easier to respect than blurred ones. Ambiguity invites pressure. Definition invites recalibration. As your predictability decreases, your authenticity increases. This trait unsettles systems built on your automatic agreement, but strengthens connections built on mutual awareness. The intensity of reactions is not proof you are wrong. It is evidence that a structure has shifted from unconscious habit toward conscious choice. Many reactions come from losing comfort, not from understanding your growth, because most people respond first to how change affects their emotional stability, not to what that change means for your development. Comfort creates a kind of psychological equilibrium. It is built from repetition, familiar behavior, and reliable emotional exchanges. When you grow, you disrupt that equilibrium. Even if your transformation is healthy, necessary, and long overdue, it alters the emotional environment others have adapted to. Their first response is rarely insight, it is discomfort. People tend to interpret change through the lens of personal impact. Instead of asking what you discovered, what you overcame, or what truth you aligned with, they often feel the loss of what your former self provided them. Perhaps you were more available, more agreeable, more self-doubting, more easily guided, more willing to carry emotional weight that was not yours. When those traits fade, the benefits attached to them disappear as well. What they experience is not your expansion, but their inconvenience. Discomfort, when unexamined, quickly turns into judgment. Understanding requires curiosity and humility. Comfort requires neither. That is why understanding is rare in immediate reactions. To understand your growth, someone must pause their emotional reflex, suspend their preferences, and look at your change from your perspective rather than their own. This is a higher cognitive and emotional effort. Many people are not unwilling, but they are unpracticed. So they default to quicker interpretations. You are different, you are difficult, you are distant, you are not like before. These labels protect their comfort faster than questions would expand their awareness. There is also an attachment to psychological predictability. Familiar versions of people allow others to anticipate outcomes and feel prepared. Your growth introduces behavioral uncertainty. You may now say no where you once said yes. You may question where you once accepted. You may leave situations you once endured. This unpredictability is not instability, it is autonomy. But to someone attached to the old pattern, it feels like risk. Humans often resist perceived risk before they evaluate actual benefit. Another source of reaction is identity interdependence. People partly define themselves through the roles others play around them. If you are the helper, the listener, the peacemaker, or the follower, your shift forces others to update their own identity positions. When you stop being the constant supporter, someone else must carry more responsibility. When you stop being the quiet one, someone else is no longer the automatic leader. Your growth rearranges invisible hierarchies. Rearrangement feels like loss to those who held advantage within the old structure. Emotional memory also plays a role. Others remember how your old behavior made them feel. Reassured, admired, centered, needed. When your growth changes those emotional returns, they may interpret the difference as rejection rather than evolution. The nervous system prefers familiar emotional rewards, even if they were built on your self-suppression. Without reflection, people protect the reward pattern, not the relationship truth. Those who truly understand growth respond differently. They may still feel surprise or temporary discomfort, but they move toward inquiry instead of control. They ask, they listen, they recalibrate. Their focus shifts from restoring their comfort to recognizing your direction. Such responses are quieter, slower, and more grounded because they are rooted in awareness rather than reflex. Resistance often appears disguised as concern, praise, or loyalty because direct opposition is easy to recognize and therefore easy to reject. Subtle opposition, however, can move closer to your decisions without triggering your defenses. When you begin to change, set boundaries, or redirect your life, not everyone who feels threatened will confront you openly. Many will approach through softer language and warmer tones. The surface message sounds supportive, but the underlying intention is to slow, redirect, or neutralize your movement. Concern is one of the most socially acceptable disguises for resistance. It arrives in careful questions and worried expressions. You are told to be careful, not to rush, not to overestimate yourself, not to risk stability. On the surface, these statements sound protective. Sometimes they are, but often they are projections of another person's, as fear of change, uncertainty, or loss of control. Instead of saying, your growth makes me uncomfortable, they say, I am just worried about you. The emotional effect is persuasive because humans are wired to respond to signals of danger and care. Concern gains influence precisely because it feels compassionate. Praise can also function as a braking mechanism. When you start evolving, some people intensify their compliments about your old self. They celebrate how reliable you used to be, how agreeable, how available, how self-sacrificing. They highlight your past strengths in a way that subtly anchors you to outdated patterns. The praise is selective. It emphasizes traits that serve the old dynamic and ignores the qualities driving your transformation. This is not encouragement toward your future. It is admiration designed to preserve your past. It attempts to make regression feel noble. Loyalty is perhaps the most powerful disguise because it carries moral weight. Appeals to loyalty frame your change as betrayal. You are reminded of history, shared struggle, past support, and emotional debts. The message implies that altering your direction equals abandoning your people. Yet true loyalty is not permanent self-denial. It does not demand psychological immobility. When loyalty is used to forbid growth, it stops being loyalty and becomes containment. The language remains honorable while the function becomes restrictive. These disguised forms of resistance are effective because they bypass confrontation and move straight into your conscience. Direct criticism activates your reasoning, emotional framing activates your guilt and doubt. You begin to question your motives. You wonder if you are being reckless, arrogant, ungrateful, or cold. Internal hesitation does what external force could not. It slows your steps voluntarily. Another feature of disguised resistance is partial truth. The concern may contain a valid risk. The praise may reflect a real strength. The loyalty may point to genuine bonds. The disguise works because it is not entirely false. The distortion lies in emphasis and timing. The message appears most strongly exactly when your change threatens the existing arrangement. That pattern reveals the motive more clearly than the words themselves. Learning to recognize this dynamic requires emotional listening beneath verbal content. You notice whether the message expands your clarity or compresses your courage. Genuine support strengthens your decision-making capacity even when it advises caution. Disguised resistance increases your hesitation while keeping you dependent on the speaker as approval. The difference is subtle but consistent. One respects your agency. The other attempts to manage it through kindness-shaped pressure. Not all responses are negative when you change, step forward, or outgrow a former version of yourself. There is a response that does not shout, does not interfere, and does not attempt to redirect your movement. It is quiet respect, and it is one of the clearest signs of conscious awareness in another person. Unlike reactive approval or emotional resistance, quiet respect does not try to control the pace or shape of your transformation. It recognizes your autonomy and makes space for it. Quiet respect often appears understated because it is not driven by emotional urgency. A person who responds this way does not rush to evaluate your decision through their personal comfort. Instead, they observe, listen, and allow. They understand that inner change is complex and cannot be judged accurately from the outside. Their restraint is not indifference. It is discipline. They resist the impulse to project their fears or preferences onto your path. This restraint requires self-awareness because the natural human reflex is to interpret others, change in relation to oneself. Where unconscious reaction seeks influence, conscious awareness grants ownership. A quietly respectful person does not assume authority over your direction. They may ask thoughtful questions, but they do not interrogate. They may express perspective, but they do not impose it. Their language contains openness rather than pressure. You do not feel pulled back or pushed forward. You feel recognized as the decision maker of your own life. That emotional experience is a reliable indicator of respect, rooted in awareness rather than ego. This kind of response also includes emotional stability. Instead of dramatizing your shift, they normalize growth as a natural process. They do not interpret your evolution as abandonment, rebellion, or superiority. They understand that development changes behavior before it changes explanation. Because they are not threatened by differentiation, they do not demand immediate justification. They can tolerate the temporary ambiguity that comes with your transition. Tolerance of ambiguity is a hallmark of psychological maturity. Quiet respect also expresses itself through boundaries on their side. A consciously aware person does not overstep into advisory control unless invited. They do not gather allies to evaluate your choices. They do not turn your change into a social discussion topic. They protect your dignity in your absence and your agency in your presence. Their support is not performative. It does not need an audience. It exists whether or not it is publicly recognized. Another feature is non-competitive acceptance. When someone is insecure, your growth can feel like a comparison threat. When someone is aware, your growth is simply your growth. They do not need to match it, diminish it, or attach themselves to it. They can appreciate your movement without inserting themselves into the center of it. This emotional independence allows the respect to remain steady rather than fluctuating with your outcomes. You can recognize quiet respect by its emotional after effect. After interacting with such a person, your thinking feels clearer, not clouded. Your motivation feels steadier, not hijacked. You do not feel managed, you feel seen. Nothing dramatic was said, yet something essential was honored. In a world of loud reactions, that calm acknowledgement is not small. It is evidence of a mind that values consciousness over control. Leaving your old identity is not betrayal. It is psychological and spiritual arrival, because identity is meant to be a living structure, not a permanent cage. What you once called yourself was often a collection of adaptations, roles you accepted to belong, behaviors you learned to stay safe, masks you wore to be approved. These patterns were not false in the sense that they were useless. They helped you survive certain environments and relationships. But survival phones are not always growth phones. When the conditions change or your awareness deepens, continuing to live inside an outdated identity becomes a quiet form of self-abandonment. The feeling of betrayal arises because others, and sometimes you, became attached to that earlier version. People built expectations around your predictability. They learned how to relate to you through that role. When you begin to outgrow it, they may feel displaced. But their familiarity is not your destiny. Psychological arrival begins when you recognize that being known is not the same as being true. You can be accurately described by others and still be inaccurately aligned within yourself. There is also an internal loyalty conflict. You may feel you are betraying your past promises, your history, your former values, or the person you worked hard to become. Yet growth does not erase the past, it integrates it. You are not declaring your earlier self worthless, you are recognizing it as incomplete. Development is sequential. Each stage prepares the ground for the next. Refusing to move forward out of loyalty to who you were is like refusing adulthood out of loyalty to childhood. Respect does not require stagnation. Psychological arrival involves reclaiming authorship. Instead of performing identity, you begin inhabiting it consciously. Your choices start emerging from examined values rather than inherited scripts. This shift feels disorienting at first, because the old identity provided automatic answers. The new one requires active awareness. You must decide rather than default. That responsibility can feel like loss before it feels like freedom. But responsibility is a sign of arrival. It means you are now present enough in your own life to steer it. Spiritually, leaving an old identity is an act of truthfulness toward your inner experience. There is a moment when pretending becomes more painful than changing. The inner voice grows louder than external expectations. You sense fragmentation when you act against your deeper knowing and coherence when you follow it. Spiritual movement is not about adopting new beliefs alone. It is about reducing inner division. When your outer life begins to match your inner recognition, you experience a form of arrival, a return to center. This transition often includes grief. You mourn lost simplicity, lost belonging, lost certainty about how you are perceived. Grief does not mean the movement is wrong. It means it is significant. Major arrivals require major departures. Something structured must loosen so something authentic can stand. What replaces the old identity is not a perfect finished self, but a truer operating position. You relate, decide, and act from a deeper alignment. You are less performative and more present. The energy once spent maintaining an image becomes available for living a reality. What looks like betrayal from the outside is, from within, a homecoming to psychological integrity and spiritual honesty. And so if you feel the tension of outgrowing who you once were, do not mistake it for failure. Recognize it as emergence. You are not here to remain understandable to everyone. You are here to become truthful to yourself. Some will question your change, some will resist it, and some will quietly honor it, but none of those reactions can define it. Only your inner clarity can. Walk forward without apology for your evolution. Release the roles that no longer carry your spirit. What you are stepping into is not loss, but alignment, not exile, but arrival. Stay with that truth and let your life reorganize around who you have finally chosen to be.